So NASCAR's qualifying procedure has been the center of controversy as of recently. And it's really been surprising to me because I didn't think that many people cared about NASCAR qualifying. At least in my observations, especially in recent years, NASCAR qualifying has been a bore, it's been a slog, and quite frankly, it's been kind of pointless to watch. I mean, especially as the cars get slower and more aero dependent, it's not really a spectacle. You don't really see the drivers earning their paycheck, so to speak. It's not very exciting from a single car perspective. And there's not a whole lot of prestige or pride or prize money on the line outside of the qualifying for the Daytona 500. In fact, there's really no stakes in qualifying outside the Daytona 500 because ultimately, on the vast majority of Cup weekends, when you're qualifying for the race, you're really just kind of determining the starting position. You're not really, there's no worry that you're going to miss the show. There's no real worry that you're going to crash the car. It's just kind of running laps. In more recent years, NASCAR, really since about 2015, has apparently agreed with me because they've been trying to spice up the show, so to speak. But they've done it in such convoluted and, quite frankly, stupid ways that they've really just gone and made everybody upset about it. So how did we get to this point? What are the problems with NASCAR qualifying? Because I think if we establish them, I can establish some solutions. And by the way, I've thought of what I think may be the perfect solution for NASCAR qualifying, as this video title would suggest. So what we've seen is NASCAR has tried group qualifying. They really think group qualifying is the way to go, way to make it entertaining. The problem is that a lot of times with how aero-dependent and I guess track dependent these cars have become, especially with the Goodyear tires, generally in stock car racing, this has always been this way, are usually at their best for 1 to 2 laps. So really you've got that first lap when you're on track to really set your time. And a lot of times when you get a few cars out there laying down rubber, the last guy across the line usually gets the fastest time. So what has happened is now, even though NASCAR will set a large amount of time aside for qualifying in a group, most of the time the cars will all just wait at the end of the pit lane until the very last minute and may or may not actually make qualifying laps, meaning the whole attempt to make an entertaining show has turned completely in the opposite direction where it's incredibly boring, incredibly frustrating, and then a lot of times you don't even have a legitimate pole sitter because nobody set a time. So there have been a couple solutions thrown out there for qualifying. And I'm going to ignore at this point saying, okay, just go back to single car qualifying or just get rid of qualifying entirely because there's really not a whole lot of discussion to those points. We've heard suggestions of possibly running the cars unrestricted, meaning taking the, I guess you could say restrictor plates, but really they're tapered spacers now. Taking the tapered spacers off, running at 950 horsepower, whatever the Cup engines are capable of these days, and really trying to set some track records or just set some really fast speeds, make the cars dance around, make them look like they're hard to drive, and set really high or low. High speeds and low lap times is what they would go for. That would be awesome, but it would be expensive, and the first time somebody crashed at 220 miles an hour at Michigan, woke Twitter would get really upset about it. So I'm guessing they don't want to do that. Looking at another potential option is going to just a complete random draw, meaning eliminate qualifying altogether. I floated this idea on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and I've since kind of backed off on this. I thought it would be a great way for a TV show style thing to have them go up to the bingo ball pit and pick out their qualifying position, but ultimately that wouldn't work out for a variety of reasons, mainly again because NASCAR's objectives seem to be pointing in the direction of wanting to entertain people. So you'll say, well, why not heat races? Well, I'll just give you the easiest example I possibly can give you. Everybody was complaining so much about how the drivers wouldn't race in the Daytona duels this year. What makes you think they're going to race in heat races for less prestigious races than the Daytona 500? I would think they would be even more boring. They'd probably be single file and pretty much uninteresting. So, you may be asking, what is your solution, David, since you're, up on your high horse and you think you've got all the solutions? Well, I'll give you one. So, here is my qualifying format. I envision this taking exactly an hour, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on how smoothly the qualifying sessions go. I propose that there would be 4 qualifying sessions per qualifying broadcast. So 4 sessions, each in the length of 10 minutes long. So the first 2 sessions would be very similar to what you see in Formula One or IndyCar racing, where you take the even numbers of cars and put them in one session and the odd numbers of cars and put them in the other session. Those even and odd numbers, of course, would be based on practice speed. So the fastest car in Group 1 would be the first fastest car in practice, and the fastest car in Group 2 would be the second fastest car in practice. So after the first session of 2 alternating 10-minute sessions, you would then whittle the field down to the top 20, the 20 fastest cars out of the first 2 sessions. Then you would go to a final 10-minute shootout with the top 10 contenders, and that would determine the pole position of the race. So where do we start changing things up? Because that may sound very similar to how NASCAR qualifying is right now. Well, the first change I would make, and a change that I'm surprised has not been implemented yet, and I'm surprised NASCAR hasn't thought about this at all, is that just like a race day event, each car would be assigned a pit box. Every car in the field sits in a pit box, their own very own pit box. Once they leave that pit box, they can no longer stop anywhere on the track. You have to go straight to the racetrack, and for any reason you pull off, you're done. You get one shot to pull off of the pit lane, and that's it. By the way, also, for this entire 40 minutes, or I guess 30 minutes, considering that not every car would take place in every session. So for that entire 30 minutes, you get one set of tires. So use it wisely. That would also probably eliminate a little bit of the advantage to having brand new tires in every session, because you're going to burn the first quick lap off very early on in qualifying, and by the time you get around to setting the pole position, those tires are going to be pretty knackered, as the Brits would say. So here's where we get really crazy, and you're going to have to stick with me on this one. Each track in qualifying for each session would have a minimum required lap distance. So, for example, at a longer track like Watkins Glen, each competitor to be classified in qualifying would have to complete 3 laps. At a 1.5 mile oval, 5 laps. And something like Martinsville or Bristol, 10 laps. Each of those increments would be done within, or required within, the 10-minute session. Now, you wouldn't be limited to the lap minimum. You could do more if you wanted to, but you can't do less. And I'll give you the consequence for what happens if you do less after I explain the rest of the qualifying procedure. So, as I said, each track will be different. The average speed of the best of your, let's say we're at Watkins Glen, you run 3 laps. Even if you run 5 laps in your 10-minute allotment of time, only your 3 best laps count, and those are averaged together in each session for your average speed. I don't have to explain, or maybe I do, that this would definitely favor consistency, favor drivers over cars. Especially as the tires would go off throughout qualifying. The better the driver, the more consistent the driver, the higher up you're going to go in the qualifying procedure. It also eliminates the possibility of some drivers getting blocked on a qualifying lap and then, going back to Fox and saying, well, he blocked me, because you've got extra time in that session that you could use to go back out there and run another lap and try to get your average up. It also diminishes the emphasis on single lap speed, which I think, again, is a problem and part of the reason why you see such a lack of participation in NASCAR qualifying. It's all about one lap, and that's not very entertaining, to be completely brutally honest with you. So this would also, for each session, it would be this way. So you would have to complete a minimum of 3 laps in your first session, 3 laps in your second, and 3 laps to try to race for the pole position. So each track would have a minimum, but it wouldn't be a minimum amount of laps that would be too out of the ordinary so that we'd be blowing tires out or just completely wearing the cars out just for qualifying. But at the same time, I think you want to have the cars out on track to make it an entertaining show for the fans and give them something to watch. So what happens if you don't make the minimum required laps? And this is where some people are really going to maybe get mad at me for saying this, but quite honestly, if it was up to me entirely and the charter system didn't exist, I'd throw the cars out entirely, send them packing, put them on the hauler and tell them to leave. If you can't figure out how to get the car qualified, you should leave. But we live in this era of racing, so we've got the charter system. Let's talk about it this way. So for if any reason, meaning if you have a tire blowout, an engine failure, if a car runs into the wall, or you crash the car, and you don't complete your minimum laps in qualifying in any session, meaning if you get all the way to the Fast 10 and you blow up, guess what? You're getting DQ'd. And what happens when you get DQ'd? Well, you don't just start from the back of the field, you start from the pit lane. And at some tracks like Martinsville or Bristol, that essentially is a lap penalty. Now, some people may say that's very harsh, but quite honestly, if you've got a fast enough car with the mandatory cautions from the stages, you should be able to make up that lap no problem and still be able to compete at the end of the race. But I think there should be some sort of penalty for not participating in qualifying, more so than just, well, we're going to send you to the back of the field and you'll probably be, if you're Kyle Busch, you'll probably be in the top 10 by lap 5. No, you know what? I kind of want to do the sports car thing and make them start from the pit lane. Give it a real incentive to go out there and send it. And hopefully something like this, even though it's harsh, even though it's radical, I think something like this would really benefit NASCAR, especially considering what their goals and what their aspirations seem to be. But I don't know. Let me know. What do you think of the David qualifying procedure? Let me know down in the comments section below. And what would you do for NASCAR qualifying? What is your solution to this puzzle, and one that NASCAR hasn't been able to figure out themselves? So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe for more motorsport and NASCAR content, and I will see you in the next video.